Maritime rights! I demand to know the applicable maritime rights for this vessel. The shriek cut through the otherwise calm coastal afternoon air before I'd even fully turned off my truck's engine. I froze, keys still in the ignition, down at the end of my private dock, my dock, the one that had been in my family for generations and was now the crucial lifeline for Coast Guard operations in the area, sat my German Shepherd, Max, looking utterly bewildered, and in my kayak, drifting clumsily away from the pilings, was a woman I barely knew, clad in a ridiculously inappropriate, possibly wine-soaked robe, clutching a half-eaten cheese board like a shield. This was Karen, the recent transplant, the recent divorcee, and bafflingly the newly elected president of our Homeowners Association. She'd moved in 2 months prior, armed with a voice that could curdle milk and a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws she treated like scripture. Her campaign, if you could call it that, centered around a bizarre PowerPoint presentation titled "How to Improve Our Community by Removing Individualism," a sentiment about as welcome here as a hurricane during tourist season. Yet somehow she'd won. Likely because no one else wanted the headache. This dock wasn't just some planks nailed together. It was federally documented, leased to the Coast Guard, long before the HOA even dreamed of dictating fence colors. It was my heritage, part of my income, and frankly, untouchable. Or so I thought. The kayak incident wasn't my first encounter with Karen's unique brand of entitlement. A few days earlier, a handwritten note, inexplicably covered in glitter, appeared taped to my mailbox. "Dear homeowner," it began, "the HOA has noticed your dock appears inaccessible to the community. Let's work together to make the coast a shared space." I'd laughed, assuming it was harmless overreach. I replied politely but firmly, attaching copies of the deed, city zoning permits, and the Coast Guard lease, highlighting the clause stating the dock was exempt from future community governance. Her response arrived the next day, slipped under my door, a single sheet of paper, no glitter this time, just 5 chilling words scrawled in aggressive cursive, "We'll see about that." Seeing her now, adrift and screeching about maritime law while holding Brie, I had a sinking feeling her definition of "seeing about that" was going to be far more chaotic than I could have ever imagined. The battle lines, it seemed, had just been drawn across the water. Karen's "we'll see about that" echoed in my mind for days. I tried to shrug it off as the bluster of a power-tripping HOA president, hoping the absurdity of the kayak incident might have embarrassed her into silence. I even stuck to my plans for a short weekend trip, needing a break from the sudden neighborhood tension. That was a mistake. I returned Sunday evening to a scene of utter disrespect. Plastic wine cups littered my dock like cheap confetti. A fancy cooler, abandoned, held a pool of melted water and what looked like decomposing brie. Someone's forgotten sandals lay accusingly on my boat cover, and wrapped around my anchor line like a bizarre sea serpent was a bright pink yoga mat. Max, usually lazy in the evenings, whined at my side, pacing nervously along the edge of the desecrated space. It wasn't just mess. A closer look revealed a deliberately snapped slat on one of the older wooden chairs and a fresh, deep scratch gouged into the side of my boat's hull. This wasn't accidental party debris. It felt pointed, malicious. My hands were shaking as I dialed Karen's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice infuriatingly cheerful. "Alex, darling, how was your trip? Did you soak up some sun?" "Karen," I kept my voice level, fighting fury. "What the hell happened on my dock while I was gone? It's a disaster zone. There are wine cups, food wrappers, someone broke a chair, and there's a deep scratch on my boat." There was a slight pause. "Oh, that? Just a little impromptu community gathering, Alex. Purely positive vibes. We were just sharing the lovely coastal energy down by the water. Are you sure about the damage? It gets quite windy down there, you know. Or perhaps Max got a little boisterous." The gaslighting was instantaneous. Max didn't snap a chair slat or gouge my boat, Karen. He's been distressed since I got home, and this is my private dock, leased exclusively to the Coast Guard. You cannot just share it whenever you feel like it. They have a fuel drill scheduled for tomorrow morning. You and your friends need to stay off federal leasehold property. A condescending laugh crackled through the phone. The Coast Guard? Honestly, Alex, are you still on about those boys in their cute little cosplay uniforms? They were probably just playing paintball down the coast last time I saw them. It's just a dock. You need to lighten up and embrace the community spirit. She hung up before I could respond. Later that night, a hesitant text came through from Linda, a quieter member of the HOA board who sometimes seemed embarrassed by Karen's antics. Alex, just wanted to give you a heads up. Karen's been telling people at the pool you're being difficult and secretive about the dock. Even hinted you might be involved in something shady because of all the military types coming and going. Just thought you should know. My stomach tightened. It wasn't just about the dock anymore. She was attacking my character, trying to isolate me. The next morning I went down early to prepare for the Coast Guard's arrival. My anger now mixed with a growing unease. That's when I saw it. Near the large fuel drum securely bolted to the far end of the dock, equipment installed to strict Coast Guard specifications. Something was wrong. A specialized valve looked disturbed. Kneeling closer, I saw it. Fresh tool marks scraped into the metal near the fitting, and one of the securing nuts felt slightly, unnervingly loose. It hadn't been like that before my trip. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just vandalism or trespassing anymore. This was dangerously reckless. I scrambled back to the house, pulled up the security footage on my laptop, and there she was. Footage from Saturday afternoon showed Karen, alone this time, fiddling intently with the exact valve I'd just inspected. She wasn't just looking, she was tampering. I saved the clip, heart hammering, and immediately emailed the file to Officer Miller with the subject line, Urgent, Interference with CG Equipment, Video. A few hours later, the Coast Guard cutter arrived. Officer Miller and 2 crew members stepped onto the dock, all business. Within minutes, Karen marched down from the street, clipboard held high like a scepter. "Excuse me," she called out, voice sharp. "This area is currently under HOA Community Watch protocols. I need to see your visitor permits and written proof of non-military operational intent immediately." Officer Miller turned, his expression unreadable but firm. "Ma'am, we are the United States Coast Guard, conducting official, scheduled operations on federally leased property. We do not require HOA permits." "This is a residential neighborhood," Karen insisted, stepping closer, right into Miller's personal space. "Your fueling activities are causing undue noise and concern. You need to cease operations and leave." As she spoke, she gestured emphatically, her hand brushing against Officer Miller's arm. He took a small, deliberate step back, his voice dropping, losing all trace of patience. "Ma'am," he stated, the words clipped and cold, "do not interfere with federal personnel. Do not touch federal officers. Step away from the dock immediately." The command hung in the air. Karen flushed, momentarily silenced by his tone, but her eyes flashed defiance. She took a grudging step back, muttering something about filing official complaints before turning and stalking away. Watching her retreat, I knew with absolute certainty this was far from over. Her definition of "we'll see" was only just beginning to unfold. The uneasy quiet after Officer Miller's stern warning to Karen lasted less than 24 hours. She wasn't chastened, she was energized. The next morning, laminated flyers appeared plastered on mailboxes and community bulletin boards. Cheap paper, garish fonts, featuring a poorly cropped photo of my dock. The headline screamed, "Is your coast being militarized? Concerned HOA president investigates." Below, bullet points accused me of hoarding vital coastal resources, fostering an elitist, non-inclusive waterfront attitude, and using intimidating federal connections to bypass community standards. It was a masterclass in twisting facts, painting me as the villain in her manufactured drama. Then came the petition. Karen launched herself into a door-to-door campaign with the fervour of a zealot, clipboard clutched like a holy text. I saw her corner poor Mr. Henderson down the street, gesturing emphatically towards my house. He looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting to escape, and after several minutes of what looked like relentless badgering, he scribbled something on her sheet just to make her leave. Linda later confirmed my fears. Karen was using a mix of charm, guilt, and thinly veiled social pressure, telling residents that signing was simply about exploring options for community harmony, while implying those who refused were siding against the neighborhood. The signatures piled up, not necessarily out of agreement, but out of a weary desire to avoid confrontation. The feeling of isolation crept in, colder than the sea breeze. As if that wasn't enough, the official harassment began. First, a crisp white envelope arrived from the HOA, not about the dock, but citing a violation for my trash cans being visible from the street 2 hours before the allowed time, a rule never ever enforced before. The timing wasn't subtle. Days later, the email landed, HOA fine notification, dock access denial. Pursuant to the board's, read Karen's, interpretation of community amenity access, I owed $500 per day, retroactive to the date she started her petition for denying fair water access. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Any trace of amusement I might have felt earlier had curdled into weary anger. I meticulously scanned the flyer, the trash can violation, the fine notification, and forwarded the entire package to Officer Miller with a simple subject: documentation of escalating harassment. Then Karen took it to a new level of creepy. One morning, I found her stationed at the end of my driveway, wearing a blindingly bright neon yellow vest and holding a homemade community watch sign. She wasn't stopping traffic. She was just watching, observing my house. When I took Max out, she called across the street, her voice dripping with false concern. "Alex, dear! Shouldn't little Max be on a shorter leash near a potential operational zone? Safety first!" It felt like psychological warfare, a deliberate attempt to make me feel penned in, monitored on my own property. The inevitable confrontation came during the Coast Guard's next scheduled visit, this time for a routine equipment inspection. Karen was waiting, practically vibrating with indignant energy, phone already in hand. "All right, you again," she announced as Officer Miller and his team approached the dock. "Let's see them. HOA regulations clearly state all external personnel must sign in at the community logbook and wear authorized visitor wristbands for insurance purposes. Where are yours?" Officer Miller let out a barely perceptible sigh. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained with forced professionalism, "as explained previously, federal operations conducted on this federally leased property are not subject to HOA sign-in sheets or wristband requirements." Karen immediately raised her phone, hitting record. "This is Karen, your HOA president, reporting live," she narrated loudly, angling the phone towards the officers, then panning dramatically towards the water. "We are witnessing repeat non-compliance with established local safety protocols. Observe the dismissive and obstructionist attitude displayed by these federally affiliated individuals who refuse basic community accountability." "Ma'am," Miller interjected, his tone hardening, "your actions, including filming federal officers during the course of their duties without consent, could be construed as interference." Karen ignored him completely, moving pointedly towards the crew members examining a fuel line connection. "Furthermore," she continued her narration, "they appear to be handling potentially hazardous materials in close proximity to residential areas without adequate community oversight or transparency. Is this safe? As president, I demand answers regarding these procedures." She took another step closer to the equipment. One of the younger crew members quickly moved to position himself between Karen and the fuel line. "Ma'am, for your safety, please maintain a distance. This is an active inspection. I have a right, Karen insisted, trying to sidestep him, her shoulder bumping his arm. A right as HOA president to ensure community safety protocols are met. That's enough. Officer Miller's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. He stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Karen. Karen, you are now actively obstructing a federal operation, attempting to interfere with safety procedures and creating a hazardous situation. Move away from this dock now, or you will face federal consequences. The authority in his voice was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Karen froze, her eyes wide for a second. She glared at Miller, then thrust her phone camera towards his face defiantly, before finally backing away slowly down the dock, still filming her skewed narrative. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Officer Miller. The weariness was gone from his voice, replaced by a cold, focused intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Alex, Officer Miller here, he began without preamble. I reviewed the documents you sent, and I personally witnessed Mrs. Peterson's actions today. She deliberately interfered with equipment inspection, physically attempted to bypass my crew near active fuel lines, misrepresented our actions while filming, and ignored direct orders to maintain a safe distance. This behavior has crossed the line from harassment into direct obstruction and constitutes a significant safety hazard. This cannot and will not continue. We are escalating this matter through official federal channels immediately. He hung up. Escalating. I wasn't sure exactly what that entailed, but staring out at the now quiet dock, I felt a grim certainty. Karen had pushed too far. The tide was about to turn, and I had a feeling the resulting wave was going to be immense. Officer Miller's promise of federal escalation hung in the air, thick with unspoken possibilities. What exactly did that mean? While I waited, bracing for the unknown, Karen, oblivious or simply uncaring, made her next move. Linda texted me frantic updates during an emergency HOA meeting Karen had called, held, bizarrely, at the community pool because, as Karen apparently declared, water is both the issue and the answer. Standing before a map where she'd drawn little sailboats in the margins, Karen presented her vision for dock equity, accusing me of stifling neighborhood growth and demanding the Coast Guard apply for guest access privileges. When someone timidly asked about legal authority, Karen reportedly scoffed, "They haven't sued me yet, have they?" Linda's text painted a picture of a board terrified into silence, watching Karen steer them directly towards an iceberg. The HOA, it was clear, was useless. Just when I was feeling utterly besieged, a lifeline appeared. A knock on my door revealed a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, wearing a faded Hawaiian shirt and aviators. "Name's George," he said, extending a firm handshake. "Retired Coast Guard, used to command out of Charleston, moved in down the street last year. Heard through the grapevine about the dock situation. Figured I ought to introduce myself." Relief washed over me as I quickly explained the escalating insanity. The filming, the obstruction, Miller's call. George listened intently, nodding. "Yeah, sounds like our Karen," he chuckled wryly. "First week I was here, she told me my American flag was too large and potentially provocative for a peaceful neighborhood. I laughed right in her face and kept it flying. Look," his expression turned serious, "I've seen this brand of petty tyranny flare up in port towns before. It festers if you let it. Don't let her bully you into submission. What's the latest? How can I help?" We talked for an hour, comparing notes, strategizing. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel quite so alone. But Karen's campaign continued its insidious creep. Small things started happening, designed to fray the nerves. One morning, I found one of the secondary mooring ropes on the dock cleanly cut. Another day, a heavy-duty cleat felt suspiciously loose, as if someone had tried to wrench it free. The security cameras, positioned for broader views, didn't capture the specific acts clearly, just shadows moving near the dock late at night. Was it Karen? Or someone she'd enlisted? The uncertainty was maddening. I found myself double-checking locks, scanning the property line constantly. Max seemed to pick up on my anxiety, growling softly at noises he'd normally ignore. Then came the late-night motion alert from the dock camera. I pulled up the feed on my phone, my breath catching. There she was, dressed head to toe in black like a B-movie spy, creeping down the boardwalk. She paused, scanned the area, then crouched beside the locked Coast Guard storage container, a heavy-duty box holding emergency spill response gear. She pulled out her phone, likely for a flashlight, and then began fiddling with the padlock, actually trying to pry it open. Just as I was about to call 911, her feet slipped on a patch of damp algae. A flailing of arms, a startled yelp muffled by the distance, and then a loud splash as she tumbled into the shallow water. She scrambled out moments later, sputtering and shaking her arms like a drowned rat. The absurdity would have been comical if not for what followed. Just before sunrise, a sharp knock rattled my front door. 2 local police officers stood on my porch, looking exhausted. "Sir," the older one began, consulting his notepad, "we received a disturbance complaint. A woman, Karen Peterson, claims she was assaulted on your property earlier this morning. Says she was pushed into the water. Mentioned something about you setting a marine hazard trap." I pointed towards the camera above the door. "She trespassed onto federally leased property at 3 a.m., I stated, keeping my voice calm despite the boiling rage. "She attempted to break into a secure U.S. Coast Guard container, and then she fell into the water because she slipped on algae that grows naturally on any dock. It is all recorded." The officers exchanged a weary glance. "Yeah," the younger one muttered. "That tracks more with the footage you forwarded from your security system earlier, but she's being insistent. Filed a formal complaint about assault and creation of unsafe conditions." They took a brief statement and left, clearly irritated at being dragged into Karen's drama again, but the seriousness of the false accusation lingered. I immediately informed Officer Miller about the incident, including the attempted break-in of the storage box. His silence on the other end was heavier than any reprimand. A few days later, a crisp envelope arrived, bearing the letterhead of a law firm I'd never heard of. It was from Kevin, Karen's newly minted lawyer nephew. The letter, dripping with legalese and misplaced outrage, accused me of negligence, assault, causing emotional distress, and threatened imminent legal action for Karen's injuries and trauma. I forwarded it straight to Coast Guard Legal. Their emailed response was blessedly brief. Received. Assessed as frivolous harassment. Maintain documentation. Advise no direct response unless lawsuit is formally filed. Reassuring, yet the onslaught felt relentless. The final straw came the following week. I woke up to find my entire property line staked out with bright orange flags. Little arrows spray-painted on the grass pointing ominously towards the dock. Taped securely to the dock railing was a laminated document titled Preliminary Expansion Plan, HOA Community Kayak Club and Wellness Nook. It featured a hand-drawn map showing my dock demolished and replaced by a floating clubhouse monstrosity with a juice bar. I took the ridiculous drawing straight to George. He stared at it, blinked, then burst out laughing. "She's drawing fake buildings now? A wellness nook? Okay, playtime is officially over." The humor vanished from his face, replaced by steely resolve. He went to a file cabinet and pulled out a worn, official-looking folder. "We're saving this," he said grimly, opening it to reveal original Coast Guard strategic assessments, blueprints, and reports detailing this specific dock's critical role in regional emergency preparedness dating back decades. "Made a call yesterday to an old friend at Homeland Security," George added, tapping a highlighted paragraph in one report. "Someone very high up is now extremely interested in understanding why a local HOA president seems determined to obstruct access to a federally prioritized emergency response site." The impact of George's call landed sooner than I expected. Linda called me a few days later, her voice hushed and trembling. "Alex, A letter just arrived at the HOA office. Official seal. Department of Homeland Security. It's a formal inquiry asking the board to explain any and all actions taken that may have knowingly obstructed or interfered with U.S. Coast Guard access and operations at your address, citing national emergency preparedness protocols. The game had just changed. Karen hadn't just picked a fight with me, or even the Coast Guard. She had, through sheer unrelenting arrogance, managed to get the attention of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security inquiry sent a shockwave of fear through the HOA board. Linda told me they were practically hiding under their desks. But Karen? Karen reacted with the kind of staggering defiance usually reserved for villains in cheap action movies. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. 2 days later, garish flyers appeared everywhere. Dynamic Dock Day! Coming this Saturday. Music, wine, community. She was actually throwing a party on my dock on federally leased, DHS inquired about property as a final desperate act of war. George and I could only shake our heads and wait. The Coast Guard had promised escalation. Now Karen was practically daring them to deliver. Saturday arrived, bright and sunny, mocking the impending storm. From my deck, I watched the scene unfold with morbid fascination. Streamers fluttered from the railings, coolers overflowed with rosé. A surprisingly large crowd of neighbors, likely lured by free alcohol and the promise of drama, mingled awkwardly. A DJ spun cheesy yacht rock, while Karen, beaming, held court near the entrance, wearing a cheap satin sash emblazoned with Dock Queen and handing out paper wristbands like she was managing Coachella. Max growled low in his chest beside me. Then the low thrum of powerful engines vibrated across the water. Heads turned. Rounding the point wasn't the usual single patrol boat. 3 sleek Coast Guard cutters sliced through the calm bay, heading directly for my dock. They moved with purpose, formation tight, an undeniable show of force. This wasn't a fuel stop. This was the cavalry. The lead cutter docked with practiced precision. Several officers stepped onto the planks, boots thudding with authority, their faces grim and unsmiling. Officer Miller wasn't among them. The man in charge looked sterner, higher ranking. Karen, sash askew, rushed towards him, clipboard somehow still in hand, despite the party atmosphere. "Excuse me!" she shouted over the idling engines. "This is a private, permitted community event. You are not on the guest list. You are trespassing and need to leave immediately." The lead officer looked down at her, his expression like granite. "Ma'am," his voice was cold steel, cutting through the DJ's fading track. "We aren't guests. We're the United States Coast Guard, and we're the reason this dock infrastructure exists. This," he swept a hand across the chaotic party scene, "is an unauthorized mass gathering, illegally obstructing access to a federal operational site. Disperse immediately." Before Karen could retort, he gave a curt nod to the cutter. With a sudden, deafening roar, a water cannon mounted on the vessel pivoted and unleashed a high-pressure arc of seawater across the dock. Pandemonium erupted. Screams mingled with the crash of glasses and the sizzle of drenched electronics as the DJ scrambled to save his gear. Guests fled, clutching ruined plates of charcuterie, scrambling over each other to get away. Amidst the chaos, one loud-mouthed guy in a Karen's Crew T-shirt lunged towards an officer only to be swiftly, almost contemptuously, restrained, issued a sharp warning about assaulting federal personnel, and then shoved back towards the exit. And Karen, she just stood there, frozen in the middle of the dock, dripping wet. Her makeup ran in dark rivers down her cheeks. The Dock Queen sash clung sodden to her wine-stained robe. She opened her mouth and screamed, not words, just incoherent fragments of rage. "Tyranny! My rights! Martial law!" until her voice cracked. Her shoulders slumped, the fight visibly drained out of her, leaving behind a shivering, defeated woman, staring blankly at the wreckage of her reign. Leaning on my deck railing, watching the tide finally, forcefully turn, I knew this chapter at least was over. The Dock Day disaster zone, was cleaned up quickly, but the shockwaves lingered. Karen, predictably, posted a furious screed on the HOA message board about jackbooted thugs and community suppression before vanishing from public view. The silence was deafening. A few days later, Linda called, voice hushed with relief. "They're gone, Alex. The board held an emergency session. Unanimous vote. Karen's removed from the presidency. All committees, everything. Cited conduct detrimental to the neighborhood and, well, they didn't say national security, but everyone knew." A fragile peace settled over the neighborhood, the kind where everyone avoids eye contact, pretending the collective insanity hadn't happened. But Karen, it turned out, wasn't one for quiet exits. One afternoon, a high-pitched buzzing sound drew my attention. A small camera drone hovered unnervingly right outside my living room window for a long moment, close enough for me to see the lens pivot before zipping down towards the dock to perform a slow scan. It felt less like reconnaissance and more like a personal violation, a message that she was still watching. Max barked furiously at the window until it flew away. Then came the official letter, not from the HOA, but from the local zoning office. A formal complaint had been filed by concerned citizen Kevin Peterson, Esquire. The charge? Operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise in a residential zone, namely my lease agreement with the U.S. Coast Guard. It was petty, desperate, and clearly Karen's vindictive last gasp channeled through her nephew. Armed with my now thick folder of federal documentation, lease agreements, and correspondence, I attended the brief hearing. Karen sat beside Kevin, arms crossed, radiating bitterness. I presented my evidence. Instead of the swift dismissal I expected, the weary-looking zoning officer frowned. "Mr. Thompson," he said, tapping the federal lease, "this involves complex issues of federal preemption over local ordinances. While your documentation appears substantial, the board requires time for review. We may need to schedule a follow-up." My stomach clenched. Just when I thought it was over, another bureaucratic hurdle, another period of uncertainty deliberately manufactured by Karen's camp. While that minor legal cloud lingered, however, something far more definitive arrived. A formal letter from the Regional Coast Guard Command referencing the DHS inquiry officially designated my dock a permanent U.S. Coast Guard emergency training and response site, solidifying its protected federal status indefinitely. Shortly after, 2 uniformed personnel arrived and installed a heavy, official bronze plaque on the main piling. "This dock supports national safety and readiness. Maintained in cooperation with the United States Coast Guard. Unauthorized interference is a federal offense." It felt like a shield, solid and irrefutable. A week later, the final piece fell into place. A brief letter from the zoning office arrived. "After careful review of federal preemption statutes regarding U.S. Coast Guard operations, this office confirms it lacks jurisdiction over the matter addressed in complaint number ZC487. Case dismissed." It was finally, truly over. The dock was secure, protected by law and metal, immune to Karen's meddling. The relief was immense, washing away months of accumulated stress and anxiety. With the zoning case dismissed and the bronze plaque gleaming on the piling, an almost forgotten sense of peace settled over my small patch of coast. Neighbors who had previously averted their eyes now offered awkward waves, tentative smiles, even the occasional apologetic muffin basket left on the porch. Life felt blessedly normal again. Max seemed to relax, his protective vigilance softening slightly, but the quiet felt fragile. Sure enough, George reported back from the next HOA meeting. Karen had resurfaced, apparently unscathed by her public humiliation and federal rebuke. She presented, with unnerving enthusiasm, several new community visions, including, buried deep in her notes, a suggestion for a serene public meditation platform requiring only minor modifications to the original dock site. She hadn't learned. She'd just regrouped. As a precaution, George and I installed a weatherproof display case at the dock entrance, showcasing copies of the Coast Guard lease, the DHS correspondence, and the plaque's official designation. A clear, silent statement. Even with these victories, a certain unease lingered. I found myself still scanning the property line, still listening a little too closely for strange noises at night. Then, last Tuesday evening, while walking Max near the town hall, I saw her, Karen, deep in hushed conspiratorial conversation with Councilman Davies, a man notorious for opposing anything involving federal cooperation or private waterfront rights. They both looked up as I passed, Karen's expression momentarily hardening before smoothing into a saccharine, unreadable smile. I nodded curtly and walked on, Max growling softly beside me. The battle for the dock was won, decisively. But watching Karen already maneuvering, already seeking new leverage points within the town's bureaucracy, I knew with cold certainty the war wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more insidious phase.